Welcome, everybody. We're happy that you've joined us today. And we are very pleased to present this panel on, We're very pleased to present this panel on documenting endangered Jewish languages, practical, ethical, and cultural issues. My name is Sarah Bunin Benor, and I'm the founder and director of the HUC-JIR Jewish Language Project. And it looks like we have a bunch of people here. We have more that have registered. So I'll just wait another minute or so before getting started on the actual presentation. More people are joining as we speak. And today's session is being recorded because we are going to put it on our website so that others can see it afterwards. Okay, I think we will get started. So our mission at the HUC-JIR Jewish Language Project is to promote research on, awareness about, and engagement surrounding the many languages spoken and written by Jews throughout history and around the world. Now, this is a big mission, and it involves multiple steps. It involves documentation and education and creating new songs in various Jewish languages, for example. But the most urgent step is documenting endangered Jewish languages. Why is this urgent? Well, because the many of the languages that have been spoken by Jews for centuries are now highly endangered. And some of them are only spoken by people over 70, 80, and sometimes even 90. So the work that we're doing to document these languages is really crucial and time sensitive. And the panelists that we have here today are doing exactly that. So I am pleased to introduce our panelists, and I am going to, first, I want to tell you a little bit about why I decided to do this. Well, I noticed that a number of organizations and individual scholars are doing similar work, and I thought it would be good to convene everybody to discuss the practical, cultural, and ethical issues that arise when we do this important work. So to start us off, I'm going to ask each panelist to introduce themselves and the work that they and/or their organizations are doing. And first, I'm going to start with Daniel Bögre Udell, Executive Director of Wikitongues.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for spending your Sunday with us, and for the panelists for being here, and Sarah for organizing this event. Shmi Vebe Yiddish, ich bin Daniel Bögre Udell, and I'm the Executive Director of Wikitongues. 7,000 languages are spoken and signed today, but as many as 3,000 languages could disappear in a generation, erasing half of all cultural, historical, and ecological knowledge. Now, it's important to be clear that language extinction is not inevitable. People abandon mother tongues because they're forced to by economic exclusion, political oppression, or violence. Language extinction is not inevitable, and language revitalization is possible. With the right resources, adults can learn ancestral languages, teach their children, and raise a new generation of native speakers, as Jewish communities did with Hebrew at the end of the 19th century. Now, Wikitongues helps people get started with this social process. We provide frameworks and free archival services for grassroots language documentation. And as of 2021, we give grants, training, and in-kind support to people on the cusp of launching revitalization projects in their communities. As Sarah pointed out, sadly, while Hebrew is one of the history's most successfully revitalized languages, other Jewish languages are quickly fading from view. And this is something we should all care about, because Jewish linguistic diversity safeguards the sum of Jewish knowledge, the sum of Jewish history. So this year, we partnered with the Living Tongues Institute for Endangered Languages and Sarah's Jewish Language Project to see how effectively we can crowdsource the effort to protect Jewish diaspora languages. So far, we've been able to archive over 50 hours of video and audio in Judeo-Malayalam, Judeo-Italian, various Judeo-Iranian languages, Ladino, and Judeo-Alsatian, which may actually be a variety of Western Yiddish. We've done this by working with the last living speakers and their descendants to record oral histories on their phones and webcams. For example, Tapan Duba Yehudi is the youngest speaker of Judeo-Malayalam and one of the last remaining speakers in India. The majority of the few dozen who still speak Judeo-Malayalam are elders in Israel today. So I'm going to share a video, a very brief clip of Tapan speaking.
ഷലോം, എൻ്റെ പേര് തവൻ ദുബ യഹൂദി. ഞാൻ കൊച്ചങ്ങാടിക്ക് സമീപമുള്ള എറണാകുളത്ത് ഇപ്പോൾ വസിക്കുന്നു. ഞാനിപ്പോൾ സംസാരിക്കുന്നത് യഹൂദ മലയാളമാണ്, അഥവാ ജൂത മലയാളം. ഇത് ഞങ്ങൾ ഹീബ്രുവിൽ മലയാളം യഹൂദിത് എന്നൊക്കെ വിളിക്കും.
Now, like Yiddish being the kind of convergence of Germanic languages with Hebrew and Aramaic, Judeo-Malayalam is actually the convergence of, well, Malayalam, a Dravidian language from India, with Hebrew and Aramaic. And that reflects at least 1,000 years of Jewish history in South Asia, which is all but lost today. As Tapan puts it, there are barely enough people for a minyan left in his community. So in addition to working with speakers like Tapan to produce original content, we've also offered a repository for linguists and researchers who have existing bodies of video and audio recordings that are not yet publicly available. And I'll show one more clip of that and then hand it off. So let me actually pull it up, sorry. So
se c'è il minyan si può fare d'inverno si fa benissimo, d'estate è un po' difficile, si fa la tefillah, si comincia con l'Echadodi, se poi c'è il minyan ancora prima si fa il Micha, e poi con l'Echadodi e si finisce con le solite canzoni di Udell e Benor, che sono la chiusura di tutte le tefillot.
So that was a clip from 1968 of Judeo-Italian, which refers to any number of Jewish languages that have been spoken in the Italian peninsula for the past 1,000 years. The last census said that there were about 250 speakers remaining of all of these languages combined. And so to have 12 hours of audio from the 1960s is truly a treasure. Anyway, to me, this is really, really important. As my grandparents would have said in Yiddish, Ashayim Dank, thanks so much for being here. And I'm excited to talk about this stuff with everybody.
Oh, great. Thank you. And now I'm going to introduce Yehudi Henshka. And let me spotlight her. So Yehudi Henshka is the director of Mother Tongue, or, well, she'll tell you more about that organization. Please.
Thank you, Sarah. Good evening. I'm very happy to be here. First, I would like to thank you for inviting me to take part in this interesting and important panel. As Sarah and Danielle said in her introduction, and that the majority of Jewish languages are extremely endangered. I have researched this field for 3 decades and to my regret have witnessed the rapid process of extinction. Most of Jewish languages speakers are found in Israel, but little has been done to date regarding preservation and documentation of these languages. As Danielle said, the revival and establishment of modern Hebrew seem to contradict the use of Jewish languages. Indeed, the fact is that most of these languages and dialects were not recorded. Actually, the main efforts in this field have been carried out by individual researchers who examined specific dialects, and most of them stored the materials to their own purposes. As mentioned, I have been engaged in recording Jewish languages as individual researcher for many years. In the 2010s, I founded the Center of Preservation of Jewish Languages and Culture, Mother Tongue. Here you can see Sorry. Here you can see the Hebrew version. There is also English version of the website. The recordings are cataloged by communities, by countries, regions, and communities. For example, the Moroccan communities are here. In each community, you can see its recordings divided by speakers and titles. And the recordings are cataloged by topics as well. We have about more than 60 topics, again, from Aliyah, childhood, and wedding, women, World War II, and Zionism. The name mother tongue fits the Israeli situation. In the process of their extinction, these Jewish languages moved from the public to the private familial sphere as mameloshen. They are spoken at home with elderly and other family members. The primary goal of this center is to record, videotape, and document Jewish languages and local culture, and to create a trustworthy, comprehensive database. To date, more than 5,000 films and recordings of varying lengths have been uploaded to the center's website. The website is freely accessible and there are no fees for its use. Another aim of the center is to record varied, long-hidden, and silenced voices, and to bring them to the center stage. Of this, the most prominent group is that of women, who by and large were illiterate and whose oral cultures have not been preserved. Special attention is directed to peripheral, forgotten communities whose cultural and Jewish voices have yet to be documented. For example, rural Jewish communities in the Moroccan Atlas Mountains. No less important than documentation is making this material accessible. This encompasses initial analysis, collection of sociolinguistic data, translation and transcription of all the recordings of the film. Unfortunately, due to budgetary constraint, at present translation and transcription are available for only a portion of the material. Here you can see the, I'm sorry, no. Here you can see the sociolinguistic data, the name of the speaker, the gender, occupation, etc. Here are the translation, and we have also transcription here. Translation and transcription. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Yehudit. Excellent. And now I'm going to introduce Tamari Lomtadze. And so we're moving from Israel to Georgia, but Tamari is actually located in New York right now. And so Tamari is a linguist at Akaki Tsereteli State University in the country of Georgia. And Tamari, is your internet connection stable now? Are you able to talk?
Yes, I hear you very well.
Okay.
It's important if you hear me.
Yes, you sound good now. Go ahead.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I am very glad to participate in this event. Thank you, Sarah, for this. Since I am researcher of Judeo-Georgian, my respondents are Georgian Jews. Georgian Juhuri is one of the oldest surviving Jewish communities in the world. They are widely regarded to be descendants of the Jews who, having escaped from the Babylonian captivity and found shelter in Georgia in the 6th century BC. In the 1970s and later in in 1990s, there was majority of the Jewish community, 3,000 repatriated to Israel. According to current data, only 100 to 1,200 Jews live in Georgia right now. It is noteworthy that Jews who stayed in Georgia almost no longer use Judeo-Georgian. Today, Judeo-Georgian is mostly spoken by Jews who live in Israel, on Russia, or America, and relatively few in Antwerp, on the Vienna. I personally recorded the materials in Israel. It is by no means an easy task to, since Judeo-Georgian is spoken in Jewish families cannot be recorded because they are afraid of being marked. It is possible to record them if you know them personally and without identification. I was able to make recording to the direct personal contact with Georgian Jews, and in some cases contact are established through common friends and acquaintances. In order to record Judeo-Georgian, one should find acquaintances among the Georgian Jews who still speak Judeo-Georgian mostly, and just old kids. As for documentation, the speech patterns of Jews, this has not yet happened in the modern sense. The word in the 1940s, the text written down by Rosa Taudidishvili were included in Georgian dialect corpus, but they were only digitized and not processed yet. As for the audio-video materials, the main part of which was recorded by me, we have video recording and the text version. We are not now going to process them according to the documentation standards. The interviews should be processed and stored in the national corpus of the Georgian language or the corpus of dialects and other corpuses. I promised Daniel that we would definitely place our material in Wikitongues as well.
Okay, thank you, Tamari. And I'm going to just show a little clip of one of the videos that you recorded.
Yes, I will show.
Okay, I will show it just because I think my internet connection is more stable. So here we go. Okay, just a brief clip there. And yes, you want to say anything about that, Tamari?
No, thank you.
Okay, great. So now we turn to Ross Perlin. And
thank you, Sarah. Thanks everyone for coming.
Introduce you. Sorry, hold on one second.
Okay.
Ross is a linguist and the co-director of the Endangered Language Alliance. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Thank you everyone for coming, and hope you can hear me okay. Apologies if there's any lag or anything. It's great to see just the amount of work that is going on in different parts of the world, in different parts of the Jewish diaspora in Israel, and among many different people and organizations around Jewish languages. The Endangered Language Alliance is an independent nonprofit which has been around since 2010 and is based in New York City, and New York City as a kind of global capital of languages, where as we've kind of mapped and estimated something like 10% of the world's linguistic diversity, over 700 languages are known or spoken here to some degree. We take New York City and the New York metropolitan area as a focus, and very much try to bring some of the ideas of language documentation, this kind of subfield of linguistics that emerged especially in the 1990s as a response to accelerating language loss, we try to map to an urban context in particular, although we sometimes also, do field work and connect to places around the globe. Obviously, Jewish linguistic diversity is a very kind of crucial part of New York's linguistic fabric and linguistic history, and it's very much a kind of diaspora capital where, I think most Jewish languages can be found, perhaps more so than anywhere else outside of Israel. It's a place where I think the urgency of that Sarah referred to is something that is felt, and the diversity of Jewish communities is really palpable. So in the last sort of 8 or 9 years, where we've been trying to do this work, one focus I think has been on Jewish languages of the Aaronic family. That's included Juhuri, the language of the Kavkazi Evrei of Azerbaijan and Dagestan, who have a substantial community here in Brooklyn. That includes Bukhari, the Bukharian Jews, of course, in Queens have a massive community, sort of one of their world center in many ways. And then also perhaps, among the sort of least known, I think, especially to other Jewish communities, are the languages of the Jews of Iran, which go beyond Farsi. To encompass the Central Plateau, the languages of the Central Plateau, which are very distinct and still in the Iranian language family, but this is from places like Kashan and Isfahan and Yazd, Bögre, and other places, as well as Shiraz, somewhat different, but the Jewish varieties of these regions were sort of highly conservative and maintained local distinctiveness long after the Muslim populations had mostly shifted to a sort of Tehran Farsi. So those have been something of a focus, and we've been working to do sort of good audio video documentation, especially, as well as some scholarly publication and some sort of community activities, a Jewish language tour of Brooklyn, various kinds of public events to bring visibility and to put Jewish languages on a stage. But we've also, where we've had the opportunity, worked on other Jewish languages, a wonderful little project called Ladino New York, focusing on the sort of history and survival and depth of the Ladino-speaking communities in New York, which featured, among others, Gloria Asher, representing the Grand Concourse in the Bronx, who's with us today. Wonderful sort of like long oral histories about what the actual life of the language was like. I mean, in the language wherever possible, sometimes in English, but about these substantial communities and how it actually played out in the city and in the life of Jewish communities. We've tried to do sort of a variety of different projects as depending on the context and the situation. And we do our best as well to translate and transcribe materials, which as Yehudit, I guess, alluded to, is in many ways the biggest challenge and is the most kind of labor intensive. Because dealing with languages where there isn't usually a written standard. It's obviously something we can talk about in terms of the complexity of documentation and what fieldwork means here, because I think there are ways in which the documentation of endangered Jewish languages certainly should draw on and be tied to larger questions around language documentation and language fieldwork. But I think there are also ways in which the case of Jewish languages is a little bit different, and where we need to sort of be thoughtful about whether we're sort of going to be just sort of labeling varieties and then saying we're going to document them in the same way that we would document languages of Papua New Guinea that are in their original territories and are distinctive. So I think there's a lot of interesting complexities around what Jewish languages or Jewish linguistic practices are, and then how do we sort of do our best to document that at a very, very late stage, at a time when not only are most of these no longer the vernaculars of communities, but where it's very hard to find speakers really, let alone contexts where speaking makes sense and is a natural act. So I look forward to the discussion that we'll all have, and I see we have just a lot of expertise beyond the panel, just in the audience, everybody. I don't know if you want Sarah to play briefly. We have a short clip of one of our closest collaborators in the Juhuri speaking community here, who we've been continuing to work with over the years. This is just a short sort of story with a little bit of translation and transcription of a video that's published.
امارنی برنی ایجگا دور وقتا یک فلت زسته یه مرد نزن آدم مرش می این نقل کمیک دیده ماره مگفت ساخترش.
Okay, thank you, Ross. Now we could hear everything you said, but you were mostly frozen, but at least we have that nice globe in the background so we can see the places where your research is focusing on. And yes, thank you for mentioning that a number of other scholars are in the audience. In addition to Gloria Asher, we have Ora Schwarzwald, Ofra Tirosh-Becker, Robert Rothstein, and Alan Miku with us today. And we could have had 300 people on this panel, right? Because there are so many people doing this work. And we do hope that those of you who are present today will participate in our audience conversation in about 20 minutes. But first, I'd like to bring up all of our panelists right now. And let me find, where did, I lost Daniel. Let's see, hold on, gotta find Daniel. There he is, okay. Daniel, you have to turn on, okay, there we go. So hold on. Okay, there we go. So now we have all the panelists here, and I'm going to start our conversation by asking about some of the practical issues about, first, how do you find speakers? So let's start with Tamari. Very briefly, can you tell us how you found speakers? You mentioned you did your research in Israel. How did you find the speakers?
Yes, find speakers I can only in Israel, in America, in Russia. Because nowadays only 1,200 Jews live in Georgia, and so we say to record Georgian Jews, one is I need to find some acquaintances, and amongst the Georgian Jews who still speak Judeo-Georgian, of course, and I was able to make a recording only direct personal contacts with Georgian Jews. In some cases, my friend helped me, and contacts are established through common friends and common acquaintance.
Okay, yeah, so that seems to be a common theme. And Yehudit, you're also based in Israel, and I know some of that work also happens in that same way of friend, but do you also get, you recruit people in other ways?
No, it's impossible.
No, Yehudit, I'm asking Yehudit. You have to unmute, there we go.
Yes, we have several circles in several ways. The first way is we have a contact with day centers, assisted living and old age homes, social services, local councils, synagogues, moshavim, etc. One example of how this avenue is employed comes from moshavim in the Modi'in region, which was carried out by Yael Wexler, our coordinator for Jerusalem area. I must mention that sadly, some of our informants died during the COVID COVID-19 pandemic, and the interviews conducted with them preserve their last memories. Another means of drafting interviews is through media appeals, public calls of interviews, appeals via social circles, Facebook and the like, and through radio and television appearances. We ascribe great importance to located speakers from the periphery, such as moshavim and towns in northern and southern Israel. We are also contacted by individuals, family members, or community activists who reach out to us after hearing about our project or being exposed to the website. At times, these efforts even lead to creation of independent groups that document and preserve their communal languages and culture. One such group is the documentation team formed by Kuchin communities that traveled throughout Israel and recorded Malayalam speakers and even transferred previously recorded materials to us.
Okay. We won't have time for everyone to answer every question because I want to make sure to at least touch on some of the questions. So Ross, I'm going to turn to you with the next question, which is, in which languages do you conduct your interviews, and do the researchers need to know the language that they are conducting research on?
I think it's interestingly related to the last question as well, because I would add to what Tamari and Yehudit said, that building long-term relationships with speakers where you kind of bring out the language and they begin to feel comfortable speaking the language, and you are creating in the fieldwork situation a more natural environment for the language is crucial. So it takes time and it's not going to come immediately. And I think another thing to keep in mind, there's a lot of interesting thinking about speakerhood in linguistics, where there are many different sort of types of speakers, and you have to kind of understand what you're dealing with. And with Jewish languages in particular, it's heavily going to be now sort of semi-speakers, rememberers, heritage language speakers. There's a whole kind of typology, but you know, it's more unusual that you would be finding sort of native fluent speakers in this idealized sense that is sometimes held up. So understanding, you know, over time, you know, where somebody is through an extended relationship. So it is, you know, it's very kind of tricky to sort of figure out the exact context of the interaction and the exact kind of linguistic situation, because you know, if you have more than one speaker of any kind, have them interview each other. This is ideal. You know, difficult to manage, but then you're going to be generating more of a natural situation. If you don't, you know, yes, usually to have a sort of, you know, closer language, and we're dealing with very multilingual people, of course. You know, all of the speakers of Jewish languages basically are going to be very multilingual, you know, so if you can, yes, I mean, Persian will be crucial for reaching speakers of Judeo-Iranian languages, but there's also, you know, as the languages are sort of closer, potentially there is more chance of interference. So there does need to be potentially kind of nudging or work done or time spent to sort of really excavate and get down to the language that you want to capture. And, you know, in many cases, given the feelings of shame and stigma and the histories of these languages being sort of ignored and belittled, it's going to take a long time for the speaker to understand that you actually really want to hear that language. That's what the target is. So it raises a number of interesting challenges, and it's something that I think can only be sort of, it's an art of field work that you know, that takes time and is about building a relationship.
Yeah, so it seems like the work that we're doing here is pretty different from the work of sociolinguistic work on languages that are thriving, where you just go into the community and record, right? That doesn't really work so well when these languages are barely spoken and you have maybe rememberers and semi-speakers. And Daniel, it seems that your initiative, Wikitongues, operates on a volunteer basis. And so you don't have professional linguists doing the interviewing necessarily. And so how do you, can you tell us a little bit about the training that goes into the volunteers that are recording your videos, and what languages they conduct their interviews in?
Yeah, that's a great question. Every now and then our volunteers are trained linguists, but more often than not, they aren't. They're just enthusiasts. Sometimes they're from the community, but don't speak the language because they're of a younger generation. And we took this project as an opportunity to improve our templates for recording oral histories. So we put together an elicitation protocol that's effectively like a big menu of questions that you can ask people about different elements of daily life or memory or hope for the future or culture, right? And what's interesting about this is it encourages people to it subconsciously encourages the speaker to talk in the past tense, to talk in the future tense, to talk in more formal or informal registers. One thing that came up, especially in working with Jewish languages, is because, as Ross, so aptly said, there's really a kind of continuum of speech among people who still speak these languages, and even if they are, relatively fluent, Jewish languages or Jewish diaspora languages often have a relationship to a parent language, right? So with Yiddish, that might be Germanic languages. With Judeo-Malayalam, it would be Malayalam, and so on. And when you have a kind of a mother tongue and like a base language or a parent language that are really similar, the speakers are definitely used to code switching between those languages pretty fluidly, and might subconsciously code switch into a more standardized variety of the language because they're not used to speaking the mother tongue as much as they used to, especially if the interviewee is not a speaker of that language, which is often the case. So one thing that when we were working with the speaker of Judeo-Alsatian, the interviewee was a linguistic student who's a heritage learner of Yiddish. And so there was some kind of linguistic kinship between the interviewee and the interviewed, but the interview was conducted mainly in English because the interviewer isn't really fluent in Yiddish and certainly not in Judeo-Alsatian. So basically he would ask a question, the interviewee would respond and then summarize what he said, and then they would kind of, in English, and then they would kind of move on. And what they found in the kind of first half of the interview was that he was speaking a more standardized register of the language and not speaking like a deeper Judeo-Alsatian or a deeper Yiddish, until they got to a section about specifically Jewish cultural ideas. And then he kind of subconsciously started slipping into like a deeper Judeo-Alsatian or a deeper Yiddish. And so we actually moved, after that, we moved that segment up to the front of the interview to try and get the speakers talking or code switching into the mother tongue as quote unquote authentically as they can. And I acknowledge that authentic's a really problematic word to use. So when volunteers come to us, we explain this phenomenon of code switching. We walk through the template with them, and then we kind of send them on their way. And what's been kind of cool about this is we've been able to use the non-Jewish stuff, just like the general template, with other languages too, in Nigeria and India. That's really, really exciting. So yeah, that's how we've been going about this.
Great. Well, I'm glad you mentioned the issue of variation, because it's a question when you're recording this speech, what speech are you recording? Do you want to record the most Jewish speech? And if so, you might want to record them studying Talmud or talking about Passover. I mean, there's many different very Jewish variants of the speech, right? And also, I mean, it depends on who the researcher is, right? In a recent issue of the Journal of Jewish Languages, which I edit with Ofra Tirosh-Becker, who's here with us today, we published an article by Luca Donna, who wrote about his work documenting Tunisian Judeo-Arabic, and he is not Jewish, and he was recording the speech of Jews, and they would speak to him as they would speak to someone who's not Jewish, or they would, if they assumed that he was Jewish, they would, so it's an interesting question, and I'm wondering if anyone here has thoughts about that. Do you or the researchers that you work with have any techniques for getting at the more distinctive language, or is that even the goal?
I might follow up just really briefly and say that one thing that came, like when you ask, like, what is the most Jewish like form of the language? I guess you could look at it from, a perspective of like studying Talmud or something like that. But what at least happened in this Judeo-Alsatian case was there were a handful of words that didn't necessarily touch on daily life, but that had a Hebrew origin, that when he was speaking in the more standardized register was missed. And so if our goal is to document these languages as they were spoken, or to document even the full spectrum from like more Jewish to least Jewish, we definitely want to find ways to elicit that the more unique lexicon, or the more uniquely Jewish lexicon, whether that is for contexts that are culturally Jewish or not.
Yeah, so Yehudit, you shared with us in your presentation the topics, some of the topics you've covered, and I know you have an elicitation protocol that gets at various Jewish holidays and life cycle events and relations with non-Jews. And so I wonder if you could say a little bit about how you came up with that elicitation protocol, and how you can then cull from that data the Hebrew loan words that were used within the languages that you're documenting. Wait, you're still muted. Wait, we can't hear you. We can't hear you, Yehudi. Okay.
Okay. It's quite a difficult question about the Hebrew component, but I'll start with the topics. In order to document every aspect in Jewish languages, interviews with the speakers should encompass a wide range of subjects having to do with their communities of origin. I mentioned general topics like the cycle of life, the Jewish year, Jewish society and community, women, the role and the status in the community, women who held position in the community, traditions passed from mother to daughter, stories told by women, saying and proverbs, songs and piyutim, customs, and beliefs in the community. The community itself, its structure, the community council and community rabbis, education facilities, charity association, the secret argo, etc. As to the Hebrew words, we cannot, in this stage, we cannot deal with the really difficult issues. So we just document, and we leave this research to the next stage, I think.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because we can't do everything in these interviews. If we did have 20 hours with each interviewee, we could have a very specific protocol where we do ask about all those questions, and then we send the questions that Daniel talked about to elicit past, present, future, distant past, distant future, different tenses in these languages. And then we do specific elicitations. How do you say, what's the phrase that's used when you're about to eat, like bon appetit? Or what is, how do you say a happy holiday for particular holidays? And how do you say this thing when you're speaking to different people? And ideally, we would get many different interviewees for each language to get at that gender variation that you all mentioned, and variation in age perhaps, or in learnedness, because these aspects of variation are central to the languages that we're documenting. I want to turn now to an ethical question, which is about consent procedures. So maybe Ross, if you could start with this question. Do you obtain institutional review board or research ethics committee approval for your research? And what consent procedures do you use when conducting your research at Endangered Language Alliance?
So as an independent nonprofit, we don't have our own IRB. It's not part of the IRB process. We have our own procedures. We also are composed of people. I teach at Columbia. My co-director teaches at Queens College and City University system. So some of our research, when it's connected with those schools, happens under those university IRBs, which I think at times provide a useful template, and at times are clearly something which have been brought from other fields and don't always apply very clearly to this kind of research, and where the what's most crucial is kind of building relationships of trust with individuals and communities on their own terms, and really having a kind of a clear understanding. And that certainly includes a process for consent, and in a consent form delivered in a language that the person can understand, in a way that can be sort of talked about, not sort of legalese that is there to please some administrators somewhere, but something that actually makes sense in terms of the community and the ethics. So yeah, I think all of that is very important. But again, I think it's about the longer term sort of relationship building that you're doing, and the questions of how the material is going to be used, how it's going to be archived, and being ready to show people beforehand, before publication, what their recording is, to potentially redact or edit parts of it if there are sensitivities, to anonymize if necessary, which I think Tamari mentioned. And I just wanted to add, in terms of the types of topics that are being discussed as well, touching on these themes, touching on both Jewish questions, but also having a real understanding of the kind of co-territorial dynamics of where people are coming from, and those places is just as crucial. I think if you come in with a complete sort of like Jewish mindset of some kind of global Jewish template, you're not going to understand what actually was going on, or what it actually was like in Cuba, Azerbaijan, and you have to understand a lot of things about that place and the neighboring cultures to actually have the real kind of conversations and relationships. So consulting and understanding that material, and then in addition, just the linguistic content as well. So couldn't say whether to what extent it's Jewish or not, but investigating how case works, or how verbal inflection works in a language. I mean, this is very much as much a part from a linguistic point of view of documenting the languages as anything else. So you do want to get kind of extended discourse, and this is part of the trust and relationship. You want people to start talking about whatever it is they want to talk about, and then you get to see kind of language in action. I don't think you may have topics you want to cover, but you don't want it to become a questionnaire with one-word answers. I mean, that would be a different project, but I don't think that's language documentation, which is about seeing a language unfolding and in action, over extended discourse when possible, which is challenging when languages are in a highly endangered state. I mean, individual words may be easier to come by, but to get actual language in a sort of in a holistic, flowing kind of way is what's much harder.
Okay, and I'll just turn the last question before we open it up for general discussion to Tamari. Can you tell us a little bit about I think there's an archive in Georgia that has some recordings of the speech of Jews, is that right? And can you tell us a little bit about the ethical issues around that? Like, were they asked for consent to share their speech with the general public?
Yes, about ethic committees, this is not a common practice in Georgia yet. I just get consent from the speaker. I always obtain explicit consent to make the recorded publicly available. But if the speaker is deceased or unreachable, I try to contact their heirs to get permission, which is by no means an easy task, since the vast majority of Jews no longer live in Georgia. Asia. The early recorded texts that are very scarce and only had written. We also make video or audio recordings available only with the consent of the speakers. In some cases, interviewers refuse to be recorded by a video camera and only audio recording were made.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So now I'm going to open it up for general conversation, and I am going to ask if any of the researchers and documenters and language activists in the crowd have comments on what we've been talking about so far. So just raise your hand. Oh, it looks like Ilan Gonen is first. Go ahead, Ilan.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you so much for this forum. I really appreciate it. I struggle with a lot of the questions that have been raised here daily, and having a wider point of view rather than just Aramaic for me is very helpful. Obviously, documenting different languages might cause different problems, but a lot of it is shared. So I really, really appreciate this forum. I have a lot of questions. I'll just take a couple. I don't know, you stop me and maybe I'll get back later. So the first one is about authentic material, authentic in quote unquote, and so authentic material and authentic speakers. This is something that I deal with quite a lot. Well, you have addressed that, but I think there's more questions into it that have been mentioned. Is a good speaker only a native speaker? What about if languages don't have native speakers anymore? Monolingual for our level of endangerment is like a privilege, obviously, but in most languages, maybe Brooklyn Yiddish is different. Maybe you can still find monolingual, but at least for Aramaic, that's not an option. Jewish Aramaic. What about where they were born? If they were born in diaspora, like where it was the mother tongue, and what about the place? For Aramaic, that's very, very, very rare. For example, that's something that until the 80s was common, but nowadays that's almost impossible to find. What about the speaker's health? When you only have 10 speakers, I resulted in recording people with breathing problems, even people who are not completely with us mentally, but they could still speak. So I recorded specific things. They couldn't answer questions, but they could tell stories. So it's good for morphology and phonology, I guess, and syntax maybe. I'm not sure. Where do you draw the line? Also, does the language have to be spoken at home or not? In my community, there's no longer, the language is no longer spoken at home. I study a dialect of Aramaic that was spoken in Iraq originally. Now it's spoken in Jerusalem.
Which dialect do you study?
The very famous Zacho. Still doesn't have a grammar book. That's actually weird. I hope to help with that. So there's no longer families that speak it at home because only 80-year-olds and above speak it. And actually, I have a few cases of siblings that don't speak to each other. and my youngest speaker is 69, and it's only because her dad was a community rabbi. So they spoke at home. So what about where it was spoken? Maybe it's spoken in the community center, and is that enough for us? So that's about the speaker.
Okay.
And what about?
Yeah, Ilan, I'm going to cut you off there just to make sure we have time for other comments. These are great, important questions, and I want to ask, are there other comments from the audience? Gloria? Wait, you have to unmute. Oh, go ahead.
I think I got it.
Yeah.
Me with a tech. But just very briefly, my head is brimming from everything. I have so many ideas, but I feel I have to say something because I'm really part of this in more than one way. First of all, muchas gracias. Thank you so much for everyone who's doing this. And I'm so glad to be in a community like this and to be even recognized, you know. I have, I think, maybe a unique perspective over here. I'm not only someone who's interested in the Jewish, all languages, actually. I love Native American stuff, but that's something else. I'm interested in all languages and I want them all to survive, but I'm also a speaker and a teacher of Ladino, Judeo-Espanol, what we called our Espanol. I don't want to get into that. It'll be the whole hour. I'm also, and most of all, I came here, I must say, because I saw the name of Ross Perlin, who is very important to me. He's the one who interviewed me. I was part of the, I forgot what it was called, New York Ladino project. Something, I forgot the exact name, but it was interviewing people who speak Ladino who are from New York. And I got there just because someone else said, oh, there's Gloria Asher, she's here too, you know? So I got into that that way. And it was, I must say, it was a very wonderful experience. And I was very aware of the problems that you discussed about how to approach someone. I mean, let's face it, these are strangers, you know? I never saw Ross Perlin in my life. He never saw me. You know, but there was an immediate, I wrote down, I mean, I have a whole page of notes here, but I'm not gonna use them. I wrote down the problem of establishing a relationship. I can only describe it in Ladino with me and Ross and the young woman who was the Spanish speaking, I wanted to say cinematographer, but you know what I mean. She took the pictures and she recorded. There was an immediate relationship. I can say only in Ladino, pishin, it means right away. P-I-S-H-I-N, but definitely with the accent on the second syllable, please. No, pishin. So that there was an immediate relationship. And I think it's really, well, maybe it's because, well, I think on both sides, I think that Ross and his people are devoted to this and really wanted to make this work. And it's not only a job, it's something that they love and something that they feel for. So if they feel for people who speak other languages, although they're not the Ladino speakers, neither one. I'm born in New York, in the Bronx, New York. I always call myself an Ismailia del Bronx. I'm an Ismaili person from the Bronx. My parents were born in Izmir. But there was that, so when Ross said it takes time to build, I felt it right away. I felt at home. And also to accept people on their own terms. I, at the time, was quite in pain. And I'm not anymore, thank God, gracias a Dios. But Ross came to my, I couldn't walk very well. Ross came to my hotel room in New York. I was there for a Ladino Comunidad conference. So I was there with Ladino, you know, expectations and things, but not this. I never expected this. He came to my hotel room. I shared it with my friend who has now passed away, hasta Lepinas, de bendicha memoria, of blessed memory. And even in the video, you can see Asta. I was so touched when I saw that. I said, here she is, you know, walking in the back with her walker in the background. And he came not only once, they came not only once, but twice. I was honored. They said they were so interested that it could do again. Oh, yeah, you know, it was a very enjoyable experience. It was a little, I can't say I wasn't nervous. I had written, as I always do, write notes and then never look at them. It was a wonderful experience because I knew that people really wanted this and I could feel the good feeling. And they were positive in Ladino. Whereas when I grew up, if you see that video, you'll see our family was ridiculed for speaking this language, for being Sephardic. We were not considered Jewish. It was really a terrible thing. So
yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. We're almost out of time, so I just want to highlight the last thing you said, which is that there can be a stigma against these languages with many endangered languages, which is one of the reasons they're endangered, right? One of many reasons. And that sometimes leads to community members not wanting to record their language. So an important step in the documentation process is raising awareness about these languages and also highlighting the importance of documenting them, even if people are not don't feel that they're very important to their identity. They might be important to the identity of the descendants of these
Yeah.
speakers. And
Yeah.
since we're out of time, I just want to end our event today with two requests. One is that people consider funding these important initiatives. And here's one way to fund these initiatives, which I put in the chat. It's tinyurl.com/Jewish-languages. And that is a fundraiser to document these languages by the Jewish Language Project, Wikitongues, and the Living Tongues Institute for Endangered Jewish Languages. And you can also find ways to donate to Mother Tongue and the Endangered Language Alliance on their websites. And I want to put a pitch for our upcoming event at the Jewish Language Project. So our event series this fall is co-sponsored by the USC Kasdan Institute at the USC Kasdan Institute. And you'll see our next event in this series is focused on Gloria's mother tongue, Ladino. And that is, it includes some researchers. It's moderated by Ora Schwarzwald, and we'll have a number of researchers and activists who are working on behalf of the Ladino language. And then in the spring, in January through March, we have a number of events about Iranian Jewish languages. And Alan Niku, who's here with us today, is on some of those panels. And we have a number of wonderful events there that are speakers and musicians talking about and performing in these endangered Jewish languages of Iran. So I want to thank you all for joining us today, and I want to look forward to seeing you all at future events.
Gracias.